And shock is wearing off. This movement, this counter-revolution began in Latin America 35 years ago. They never won the battle of ideas. That's the great myth, that's the great fairy tale. All they did was kick us when we were down. They didn't win the intellectual debate.
The fall of the Berlin Wall did more than any books that I or anybody else has written to persuade people that that was not the way to run an economy.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Look at what's happened to the asking about the intellect, whether we won the position. Socialism used to be defined. It's defined today in any dictionary as government ownership of the ownership and operation of the means of production. Does anybody believe that anymore?
That's the definition of socialism, or
that's what so.
Or that's a better system. I don't think anybody believes that's a better system.
Anybody believe that that's a better system?
Yeah, Fidel Castro, but who else?
Very few.
That means that we never stopped believing that we could build a more just, egalitarian society.
Right.
Right. Is there any
nobody in Russia believes it?
Nobody in Russia believes it, and Russia isn't run that way anymore. Yeah. There's no country in the world that is run that way, except for
Fidel Castro,
North Korea.
North Korea and Venezuela, maybe.
Well, Venezuela not yet, but it's on the way.
All right.
Because they have a really tough intellectual job. Their job, well, I'll quote Milton Friedman.
See, I think there's been one underlying basic fallacy in this whole set of Social Security and welfare measures. And that is the fallacy, this is at the bottom of it, the fallacy that it is feasible and possible to do good with other people's money. Now, you see, that view has two flaws. If I'm going to do good with other people's money, I first have to take it away from them. That means that the welfare state philosophy of doing good with other people's money, at its very bottom, is a philosophy of violence and coercion. It's against freedom, because I have to use force to get the money. In the second place, very few people spend other people's money as carefully as they spend their own.
Their job is to convince people that by trying to do good, you do bad. And by doing bad, by pursuing your most selfish desires, you do good.
You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy. The world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus. Einstein didn't construct his theory under order from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. If you want to know where the masses are worst off, it's exactly in the kinds of societies that depart from that. So that the record of history is absolutely crystal clear, that there is no alternative way so far discovered of improving the lot of the ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities that are unleashed by a free enterprise system.
But it seems to reward not virtue as much as ability to manipulate the system.
And what does reward virtue? You think a communist commissar rewards virtue? You think a Hitler rewards virtue? You think, excuse me, if you'll pardon me, do you think American presidents reward virtue? Do they choose their appointees on the basis of the virtue of the people appointed or on the basis of their political clout? Is it really true that political self-interest is nobler somehow than economic self-interest? You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. And just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us.
Crazy, crazy talk. Very expensive to convince people of something so deeply counterintuitive.
One of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results. We all know
a famous road that is paved with good intentions. The people who go around talking about their soft heart, I admire them for the softness of their heart. But unfortunately, it very often extends to their head as well. Because the fact is that the programs that are labeled as being for the poor, for the needy, almost always have effects exactly the opposite of those which their well-intentioned sponsors intend them to have.
It is much cheaper to convince people that to do good is good, bad, bad. Because we know this. We already know.
If you ask me, why do you believe in freedom so much? I don't really know. But somehow, what I want is human freedom, for people to be free to talk to one another, to deal with one another, to love one another or hate one another. And that's what people don't really recognize, that that's the great virtue of the free market, of the private market. It enables people who hate one another, who don't speak the same language, who would fight one another if they had the chance, to cooperate together economically. We were able to deal with China when China was a communist state. Even though we thought that that was a terrible arrangement, we could still cooperate.
Has he helped many people, poor people in the world? And I just take India and China, 37% of the world's population. Hundreds of millions of people in these two countries are now able to live at a much more decent standard of living as a result of the reform of their economic policies toward more free market policies, less regulation, less government, and the like. But there was one person who they're more indebted to than anybody else for their great improvement in their situation. In my judgment, that person is Milton Friedman.
And that's what markets enable people to do. They bring freedom with them.